I stood there wearing a cheap volunteer sash, while Patricia Hollis looked right through me, mocking my simpler life in front of everyone. They all laughed, thinking I was nothing but a disgraced socialite, forced to serve them drinks. They had no idea I held the reins of one of the largest tech empires in the world, or that the crippled commoner I married was the Archduke they all bowed to. Oh, how quickly their smiles would fade. Subscribe and comment where you are watching from, because the most powerful person in that room was carrying the serving trays. The grand ballroom of the Henderson estate shimmered under 1,000 crystal lights, each one reflecting off polished marble floors and antique gold leaf. It was the annual Silver Lining Ball, the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, an event where the air itself seemed to hum with the quiet power of old money and even older snobbery. The women floated in gowns that cost more than my first car, their diamonds sparkling like captured starlight. The men, in their impeccably tailored tuxedos, moved with an easy confidence, their conversations laced with stock market figures and whispered political intrigues. And there I was, Barbara Cobb, dressed in a simple black cocktail dress, a demure choice by high society standards, but it was the bright, garish volunteer sash across my chest that truly announced my station. My family, the Cobbs, had once been part of this glittering world, our name a testament to generations of quiet wealth and influence. But life has a funny way of turning tides, and our fortune had dramatically collapsed, thanks to my manipulative uncle's reckless gambles. He, in his infinite wisdom, had seen only one way out: marry me off. My sacrifice, he called it, to a lame blacksmith to settle a massive unspoken debt. That blacksmith, Harold, was now my husband, a man whose true identity as the lost Archduke had been revealed to me in a whirlwind of a wedding day, shattering every expectation I had for a life of quiet despair. But tonight, to this crowd, I was still the disgraced girl, the poor thing who had married beneath her station, a stark reminder of how quickly fortunes could change. They didn't yet grasp the true depth of Harold's power, let alone mine. I moved through the opulent room, attempting to look busy, directing guests to the various charity tables, my movements as inconspicuous as possible. I was acutely aware of the whispers, the fleeting, pitying glances, and the barely concealed amusement in some of the eyes that met mine. Patricia Hollis, our hostess for the evening, embodied all that was rigid and unforgiving in this society. Her family name, Hollis, was practically synonymous with the city's origins, her wealth so old it practically had dust on it. She was a matriarch who ruled with a silk glove over an iron fist, and she delighted in keeping everyone in their proper place. My volunteer position, she had made clear, was precisely that, my proper place. I was guiding a couple towards the silent auction when I heard her voice, sharp and clear, cutting through the pleasant murmur of the crowd. "Barbara, dear, how quaint to see you here." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a prickle of annoyance that I fought to suppress. Patricia was holding court near the grand sweeping staircase, a prominent industrialist hanging on her every perfectly articulated word. She paused, her gaze sweeping over me with a calculated slowness, lingering on the volunteer sash as if it were a costume from a bygone era. Her smile, wide and painted on, didn't quite reach her eyes, which held a chilling glint of satisfaction. "I do hope you're finding your service position fulfilling," she continued, her voice just loud enough to draw attention from several nearby groups. Heads turned, conversations faltered. The air suddenly felt thick with anticipation. "It's quite admirable, truly, how you've adapted to the simpler side of life." The word simpler hung in the air, a thinly veiled insult, a direct jab at my current perceived status. It implied a demotion, a fall from grace, a life of less luxury, less consequence. It was a subtle, yet brutal, reminder of the social chasm she believed now separated us. Her eyes, cold and assessing, swept over my modest dress, a silent judgment that spoke volumes. "Do make sure our guests are properly directed, won't you?" she added, her tone dripping with saccharine concern, her words a public instruction. "Wouldn't want anyone to mistake you for, well, an actual guest." A ripple of hushed chuckles spread through the small cluster of people around her. Patricia offered a dismissive wave of her hand, as if swatting away a minor annoyance, and then turned back to her conversation, her back to me, signaling the end of our interaction. I was left standing there, a public spectacle, the amused smirks of the onlookers burning into my skin. It was a perfectly executed humiliation, designed to put me firmly in my place. My cheeks flushed, not from shame, but from a quiet, burning indignation. "Oh, Patricia, if only you knew. You knew about my family's fall, about my arranged marriage to the man you deemed a blacksmith. But you didn't know about the quiet inheritance, the substantial stake in an emerging tech company I'd received years ago from an eccentric distant relative. You didn't know I had been silently nurturing that investment, watching it grow into a formidable financial power that I had kept secret, even from Harold initially. And you certainly didn't know the full, unbridled power that Harold, the Archduke, truly wielded, or the quiet, steel-backed resolve of the woman you were so carelessly belittling. My life might have begun as a pawn in someone else's cruel game, but I was quickly becoming the queen, and this ballroom was merely my chessboard. I took a deep, steadying breath, my smile unwavering. I would not give her the satisfaction of seeing any crack in my composure. I would play my assigned role for now, but my mind was already racing, turning over strategies, anticipating the precise moment to make my own, far more impactful, move. This public slight was just the opening gambit. They wanted a game, I was ready to play. The weight of the volunteer sash no longer felt like a symbol of my reduced status, but rather a cloak, a perfect disguise for the quiet power I secretly wielded. They thought they saw a fallen socialite, but they were looking at the beginning of their reckoning. Before I continue, drop a comment telling me where you're listening to this from, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. You won't want to miss the ending. My smile remained fixed, a mask of polite indifference, even as the sting of Patricia's words lingered in the air like an unpleasant perfume. The small, private smirks exchanged among the onlookers felt like tiny pinpricks, each one a reminder of the social chasm they believed I had tumbled into. I was meant to feel small, diminished, a cautionary tale. But beneath the surface, a quiet resolve hardened. They had misjudged me, and they had certainly misjudged the man I was now married to. My humble volunteer sash felt like an invisible shield, allowing me to observe their world from a new vantage point. It wasn't despair that settled in my heart, but a sharpened sense of purpose. I took another breath, preparing to resume my duties, to fade back into the periphery, when a soft hand gently touched my arm. I turned to find Janet Weston standing beside me, her eyes, warm and familiar, holding a depth of understanding that was rare in this glittering, superficial crowd. Janet, with her quiet elegance and genuine spirit, had always been a beacon of kindness, a childhood friend who saw past the trappings of wealth or its absence. She was a respected art collector, known for her discerning taste and, more importantly, her unwavering integrity. Her smile was sincere, a stark contrast to Patricia's carefully constructed one. "Barbara, darling," she began, her voice a gentle murmur, filled with a warmth that instantly soothed the lingering irritation I felt. "You look absolutely radiant." Her words weren't a polite platitude. They were spoken with a sincerity that resonated deep within me. She reached for my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze that spoke volumes without needing any more words. It was a silent acknowledgement of the public slight I had just endured, and a quiet offering of support. "Don't let anyone dim your light," Janet continued, her gaze unwavering, direct, and compassionate. "I know you've faced so much with such grace. It takes immense strength, you know, to carry yourself with such dignity amidst, well, all of this." Her eyes flickered, ever so subtly, in Patricia Hollis's direction, a fleeting gesture that was almost imperceptible, yet perfectly understood between us. It was a silent censure of Patricia's behavior, a quiet defiance of the social rules that allowed such cruelty. "If you need anything at all tonight," she added, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper, "please come find me, or simply come sit with me. Your company is far more valuable than any task here." Her words were a balm, a loving reassurance that in her eyes I was still the Barbara she had always known, not some disgraced socialite relegated to a servant's role. She didn't acknowledge the volunteer sash, didn't comment on its presence. She simply looked at me, truly saw me as an equal, a friend. Then, with an almost seamless transition, as if to cement her unwavering support and offer me an escape from the awkwardness of the moment, Janet began to speak of something entirely different. "Oh, I must tell you, I recently acquired the most exquisite first edition of The Secret Garden. You know how much you adored that story as a child. I've been meaning to show it to you. The illustrations are simply breathtaking." She started discussing the subtle nuances of the antique bindings, the delicate foxing on the pages, drawing me into a world far removed from the petty snobbery of the ballroom. Her genuine interest, her gentle tone, and the way she treated me as if I were the most important guest there, completely ignoring the visible symbol of my supposed demotion, was a quiet act of rebellion against the unspoken rules of the evening. It was a lifeline in a sea of judgment, and I clung to it, my heart swelling with gratitude for her unwavering friendship. As she spoke, I could feel the subtle shift in the air, the curious glances from those who had witnessed Patricia's earlier display now turning into something akin to confusion. Janet, with her impeccable reputation and quiet moral authority, had just publicly endorsed me, making it clear that my standing, at least in her eyes, remained untouched. It was a small, elegant victory, but a victory nonetheless. I smiled genuinely, feeling a quiet lightness fill my chest as Janet continued to describe the delicate details of her newly acquired rare book. Her words were a shield, protecting me from the cold stares and the lingering echoes of Patricia's earlier dismissal. It felt good, for a moment, to simply be Barbara, a friend sharing an interest, rather than the disgraced socialite or the volunteer. Janet's presence was a warm anchor in the shifting currents of the ballroom. I could see some of the curious glances softening, replaced by an appreciation for Janet's steadfast loyalty. Just as Janet was elaborating on the faint scent of aged paper that emanated from the book, a shadow fell over us. The air around us seemed to chill, and I sensed, rather than saw Patricia Hollis returning, her presence as imposing as a storm cloud. She had clearly been observing our exchange, her finely tuned social radar picking up on any deviation from the pecking order she so zealously maintained. Her smile was back, painted on, and even more brittle than before, her eyes flicking between Janet's serene expression and my still present volunteer sash. "Ah, Janet, darling, there you are," Patricia purred, her voice sweet, yet with an edge of steel that was unmistakable. She didn't look directly at me at first, addressing Janet as if I were simply a piece of the furniture, or perhaps a minor, unimportant attendant. "I was just wondering if you'd seen the new sculpture display. Quite avant-garde, wouldn't you agree? Though perhaps a bit much for some tastes." Her gaze finally slid to me, a calculated sweep that took in my simple dress and the glaring sash. "Barbara, dear," she said, her tone saccharine, but now with an undeniable note of passive aggression. "Do make sure you're not monopolizing Mrs. Weston's time. There are, after all, so many guests who might need assistance. I believe we have quite a few who are still trying to locate the coat check or perhaps require directions to the restrooms. Our purpose here, as you know, is to ensure everyone enjoys the charity aspect of the evening, not just, well, for idle chatter." The implication hung heavy in the air, sharper than any direct insult. She was telling me, in no uncertain terms, that I was neglecting my supposed duties, that my conversation with Janet was frivolous, and that my presence in such a context was a distraction from the real purpose of the gala, the charity which she, of course, was presiding over. It was a clear admonishment, delivered with a smile designed to remind me that my place was to serve, not to socialize, especially not with someone of Janet's standing. A noticeable hush fell over the small circle that had gathered, drawn by Patricia's authoritative tone. I felt the collective weight of their curious stares, gauging my reaction, anticipating a flicker of embarrassment or defiance. But I had long since learned to master the art of composure. My heart gave a tiny, defiant thump, but my face remained serene. "Of course, Mrs. Hollis," I replied, my voice calm and even, betraying no hint of the quiet fire that simmered within me. I offered a small, polite nod, acknowledging her words without accepting their underlying sting. "You're absolutely right. There are indeed many guests who need guidance." I then turned to Janet, offering her a fleeting, understanding glance, a silent thank you for her earlier kindness. "It was lovely chatting with you, Janet. Perhaps we can continue our discussion on the secret garden later." Janet gave my hand another reassuring squeeze, her eyes conveying her disapproval of Patricia's behavior, but she wisely kept her counsel. I turned away, the volunteer sash feeling heavier, yet also more potent. As I walked away from the glittering cluster of guests, my steps were light and measured. I resumed my perfunctory duties, moving among the tables, my eyes scanning the room, my mind already working, quietly charting the hidden currents of power and influence. They thought they had seen my fall, but they had only witnessed my disguise. The dance, I realized, was far from over. I continued my circuit through the gilded halls, a silent observer in my unassuming uniform. My job, as Patricia had so graciously clarified, was to assist, to direct, to be a functional yet largely invisible cog in the grand machinery of her carefully orchestrated evening. I nodded politely to those who brushed past me, offered directions with a soft voice, and occasionally helped someone locate a misplaced clutch or a particular charity table. Each interaction was a delicate dance, a performance where I had to embody the humble volunteer, all while my mind buzzed with a quiet, strategic energy. I noticed the subtle ways people avoided my gaze, the brief, awkward pauses when they realized I was just the help. It was fascinating, in a way, to experience this world from such a starkly different perspective. Before, as a cob, I had been an insider, part of the whispered conversations and the knowing glances. Now I was an outsider looking in, privy to a different kind of truth. I saw the hidden anxieties behind the polished smiles, the desperate scramble for social advantage, the casual cruelty veiled in politeness. Moving towards a quieter alcove, where a series of exquisite antique maps were displayed for the silent auction, I noticed a woman fumbling with her opera glasses. She was older, with silver hair meticulously pinned in a soft bun, and wore a gown of deep sapphire blue that shimmered under the spotlights. She looked a little lost, her brow furrowed in mild frustration, as she tried to focus the lenses on a tiny inscription on one of the maps. "May I help you with those, ma'am?" I offered, stepping forward with a gentle smile. Sometimes the focus can be a bit tricky. She looked up, her blue eyes, a shade lighter than her dress, meeting mine. There was no flicker of disdain, no hint of the polite dismissal I had grown accustomed to. Only a mild surprise, followed by a genuine, appreciative smile. "Oh, my dear, that would be wonderful. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, and this tiny print is quite challenging." She handed me the opera glasses, her fingers brushing mine. Her touch was warm, unburdened by judgment. I adjusted the small wheel, focusing them carefully, then handed them back. "There you go. See if that's a bit clearer for you now." She raised them to her eyes, peering at the map. A pleased sigh escaped her lips. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect. Thank you so much, my dear. That's ever so kind of you." She lowered the glasses, her gaze resting on my face with a warmth that felt like a ray of sunshine. "You know, it's not often you encounter such genuine helpfulness these days. Everyone is always in such a rush or caught up in their own worlds." Her words were simple, yet they resonated deeply. She wasn't looking at my sash, wasn't placing me in a box. She was simply acknowledging a small act of kindness. "It's my pleasure, Mum," I replied, my smile feeling more authentic than any I had offered all evening. "Please, call me Shirley," she said, her smile widening. "Shirley Tanner." "And you are?" "Barbara," I answered, omitting my last name, a small indulgence. "Well, Barbara," Shirley Tanner said, a soft, approving look in her eyes, "you have a lovely spirit about you. Don's let anyone ever tell you otherwise." She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if sharing a secret understanding, and then turned back to the map, a contented hum escaping her lips. It was a brief encounter, a fleeting moment of pure, unadulterated human connection, and it filled me with a quiet strength that far outshone the glitter of the entire ballroom. The warmth from Shirley Tanner's kind words lingered, a gentle counterpoint to the glittering superficiality that shimmered around me. I felt a quiet strength radiating from that brief, genuine connection, a reminder that true value lay far beyond the rigid walls of social status. I continued my rounds, directing a confused couple to the champagne fountain, pointing out the silent auction tables to another group, my movements smooth and unassuming. My composure, I realized, was being misinterpreted as resignation, a quiet acceptance of my place. It was this very perceived compliance that seemed to embolden Patricia Hollis. I saw her across the room, her elegant head bent in conversation with what looked like a prominent art dealer, but her eyes, sharp and calculating, never truly left my path. She watched me, her gaze lingering on my volunteer sash, a proprietorial smirk playing on her lips. I could almost hear her internal monologue. Look at her, the disgraced cob heiress, meekly fulfilling her duties. She knows her place now. Suddenly, her conversation paused. She straightened, her posture regal and commanding, and her voice, though not overtly loud, carried across the polished floor with an unmistakable authority. "Excuse me, everyone," she announced, her smile tightening as she swept her gaze over the room, ensuring she had everyone's attention. Then her eyes landed squarely on me. "Barbara, dear, a word if you please." A ripple of curiosity spread through the nearby guests. I felt all eyes turn my way, a familiar pressure. I maintained my serene expression, walking towards her with a calm, even pace. "Mrs. Hollis?" I asked, my voice polite, devoid of any challenge. Patricia leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was still perfectly audible to those around us. "Barbara, I'm afraid you're causing a bit of a distraction. We aim for seamless elegance at the Silver Lining Ball, And while your enthusiasm for service is commendable, I'm afraid it's becoming rather pronounced." She straightened fully, her hand gesturing vaguely at my person, then swept her gaze over the curious onlookers. "I think perhaps it's time for you to take a little break, don't you agree? For the benefit of all our esteemed guests." Before I could reply, she turned her head slightly, snapping her fingers discreetly towards a tall, uniformed security guard standing near a velvet rope. "Harold, if you would be so kind as to escort Ms. Cobb to the staff entrance. She seems to have had a rather long evening." The guard, a burly man with a placid expression, nodded, already moving towards me. My heart gave a powerful thump, a sudden surge of adrenaline. This was it. The public dismissal, the open humiliation. Several guests gasped softly, others averted their eyes, embarrassed for me, while a few, I noticed, exchanged knowing, triumphant glances. Janet Weston, whom I spotted across the room, looked distressed, a worried frown on her face. "Right this way, ma'am," the guard, Harold, said, his tone neutral, his hand gesturing towards the main arched entrance. He wasn't aggressive, merely professional, following orders. I turned, my posture still straight, my chin held high. I felt the weight of their judgment, the quiet triumph of Patricia Hollis, the collective gasp of shock. Every step echoed the whispers and assumptions that had followed me for months. This wasn't just about being asked to leave, it was about being publicly branded, cast out, marked as unworthy. I could feel the cold marble floor beneath my sensible heels, the faint scent of lilies and expensive perfume filling the air, a stark contrast to the burning humiliation I was meant to feel. The staff entrance was just ahead, a heavy oak door that promised obscurity and a definitive end to my night. But just as we reached the threshold, and the guard gently motioned for me to pass through, I stopped. The heavy oak door loomed, a final public barrier. The guard, Harold, paused, his hand still gently guiding. I could feel the ripple of triumph from Patricia, the relieved gasps from those who felt awkward, the quiet judgment from the rest. It was a moment suspended, a breath held by an entire room. But just as the first flicker of genuine defiance was about to break through my carefully constructed composure, a new sound cut through the hushed tension. It wasn't the polite chatter of the guests or the soft strains of the string quartet. It was a murmur, then a distinct stir near the main entrance, followed by an immediate settling of the energy in the room, as if a powerful magnet had just been introduced. All heads, including Patricia Hollis's, swiveled towards the grand archway. And there he was, Stanley Garner. A hush fell, a respectful, almost reverent silence that only a truly formidable presence could command. He stood for a moment, broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed, his silver hair glinting under the chandeliers, his eyes, sharp and intelligent, sweeping over the opulent scene. His gaze wasn't drawn to the most glittering jewels or the most influential guests. Instead, it moved swiftly, deliberately, until it landed precisely on me, standing by the staff entrance, with the security guard at my side, and the volunteer sash a stark contrast against my simple dress. A subtle change came over Stanley Garner's face. It wasn't anger or surprise, but a look of profound recognition, mixed with something akin to protective concern. He began to move, not towards the throng of society's elite clamoring for his attention, but with an unwavering stride directly towards me. Each step was purposeful, carrying immense weight. The path cleared before him as if by an invisible force, guests parting, their whispers dying down. Patricia Hollis, who had been basking in her small victory, now froze, her smile dissolving into a bewildered frown. She watched, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and disbelief, as Stanley Garner, the titan of international finance, ignored her completely. He approached, his gaze fixed on me, and then, to the absolute astonishment of everyone in the room, he performed a slight, yet unmistakably deep bow right there in front of me, the volunteer. "Barbara, my dear," he said, his voice, though not loud, carried with absolute authority in the suddenly silent ballroom. He completely disregarded the guard, Harold, who seemed to shrink back, equally stunned. I was just discussing the latest acquisition with Harold, and frankly, we're at an impasse. We need your unique insight on the Q-Tech merger. Your early readings on their market penetration were quite simply prophetic. The board values your judgment above all else in matters of this complexity. He looked at me with an expression of genuine respect, not a hint of condescension, treating me as an indispensable partner, not a lowly volunteer. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. And since you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. It really helps me keep bringing stories like this. Patricia Hollis stood as if sculpted from ice, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed world momentarily shattered. The guests, who moments ago had been exchanging triumphant glances, now looked utterly bewildered, their eyes darting between Stanley Garner, the volunteer sash, and Patricia Hollis's shell-shocked face. The air crackled with a silent, collective recalibration of everything they thought they knew about Barbara Cobb. I met Stanley Garner's gaze, a small, knowing smile touching my lips. "Stanley, it's always a pleasure," I said, my voice calm and steady, despite the whirlwind of silent shock rippling through the room. I ignored the security guard, Harold, who had discreetly melted into the background, his face now a mask of utter stupefaction. "And you're right, the Q-Tech merger is certainly at a critical juncture." I turned, my eyes sweeping over Patricia Hollis's frozen, incredulous face, then to the stunned assembly of guests. "Indeed, Stanley," I continued, allowing my voice to carry just a little further, with a warmth that held a hint of steel. "Their recent expansion into luxury event spaces, for instance, makes their involvement with the management of this very hall particularly noteworthy." I paused, letting that information settle like a fine dust over the collective consciousness. The air thickened with unspoken questions. Patricia Hollis finally managed to push out a single, strangled sound, a little gasp, but no words formed. Her eyes were fixed on me, darting to Stanley, then back again, trying to piece together a reality that was rapidly crumbling around her. I offered her a gentle, almost sympathetic smile. "Which, of course, Patricia, brings me back to my earlier service position tonight," I explained, my tone perfectly even. "I simply wanted to ensure that our annual charity event, hosted in our hall, sponsored primarily by my family's foundation, was running perfectly." I let my gaze sweep over the grand ballroom, the glittering chandeliers, the polished marble. The Cobb Charitable Trust has always taken immense pride in supporting the Silver Lining Ball, and naturally, with so many important guests from our Q-Tech investment group in attendance, I felt it was my personal responsibility to make sure everything was up to our usual exacting standards. Stanley Garner nodded slowly, a subtle, approving gleam in his eyes. He stood beside me, a silent, powerful endorsement of every word I spoke. The weight of his presence alone was enough to silence any budding whispers or doubts. The silence that followed was absolute, a profound stillness, broken only by the distant murmur of the city outside. Patricia Hollis's face was a tableau of disbelief, her carefully constructed composure completely shattered. Her painted smile was gone, her jaw slack, her eyes wide and unseeing. She tried to speak, her lips parting, but no sound emerged. She simply stood there, a formidable matriarch reduced to a mute, bewildered statue, her grand ball suddenly transformed into a stage where her own carefully selected volunteer had just revealed herself to be the undisputed master of ceremonies. The profound stillness in the ballroom stretched, thin and taut, then shattered into 100 hushed whispers. The murmurs began like a distant ripple, growing steadily, each voice contributing to a collective hum of disbelief and frantic re-evaluation. Faces that had, moments before, held smug amusement or polite pity, now shifted into expressions of shock, confusion, and a dawning, uncomfortable realization. I watched as the social landscape of the room literally began to rearrange itself. Guests who had been clustered near Patricia Hollis laughing at some light-hearted remark she'd made just moments before, now subtly, almost imperceptibly, eased away. A woman in a shimmering silver gown who had been leaning intimately into Patricia's conversation circle suddenly found an urgent need to admire a nearby painting, slowly backing away until a discreet distance was established. A gentleman, previously engrossed in conversation with Patricia's husband, abruptly remembered a vital appointment he had to make on his phone, turning his back entirely. It was a silent ballet of self-preservation, loyalties shifting like sand in a sudden gale. Patricia Hollis herself remained rooted to the spot, a statue of petrified horror. Her eyes, still wide and unblinking, seemed to flicker between Stanley Garner, who stood impassively at my side, and me, who continued to offer her that gentle, almost pitying smile. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her usually vibrant cheeks a pallid white. She looked like a woman who had just seen a ghost, or worse, discovered she was utterly irrelevant. I felt a quiet satisfaction bloom within me, a soft warmth spreading through my chest. This wasn't just about public humiliation, it was about the swift, undeniable re-establishment of truth. It was about exposing the fragility of a social order built on superficial judgment and inherited privilege, an order Patricia had so ruthlessly championed. The volunteer sash, which had been meant to mark my shame, now felt like a badge of honor, a silent testament to the resilience and strategic depth they had all underestimated. My simple black dress, once seen as a sign of my reduced circumstances, now highlighted the quiet power I held, unadorned by ostentation. Janet Weston, from across the room, caught my eye. Her worried frown had transformed into a proud, knowing smile, a small nod of shared understanding passing between us. Shirley Tanner, too, whom I spotted near the map alcove, offered a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of approval, a flicker of genuine delight in her blue eyes. These were the true connections, the honest gazes, the genuine hearts in a room full of performative grace. Stanley Garner finally broke the lingering silence, his deep voice carrying without effort. Indeed, Barbara, your involvement with the Cobb Charitable Trust, and of course your astute management of Q-Tech's portfolio, ensures that this event consistently exceeds expectations. Your attention to detail is, as always, unparalleled. He turned to me, his expression radiating respect. So, about that Q-Tech merger, shall we find a quieter corner to discuss the next steps? Harold specifically mentioned your projections on the European market. His words were a final, definitive declaration, an unassailable confirmation of my status and influence. Patricia Hollis's lips finally moved again, but only a whisper of air escaped. She looked utterly lost, adrift in a sea of her own making. The room had fallen silent once more, but this time it was a silence of profound respect and dawning understanding. Everyone was waiting for my next move. I looked at Stanley, then back at the assembly of faces, some sheepish, some calculating, some simply bewildered. I took a deep breath, and with a serene smile that reached my eyes, I addressed the entire room, my voice clear and unwavering. Thank you all for attending the Silver Lining Ball tonight. Thank you all for attending the Silver Lining Ball tonight, I said, my voice carrying a quiet strength that seemed to cut through the lingering murmurs of surprise. I smiled, a genuine warmth radiating outwards, embracing everyone but holding a particularly soft edge for Janet and Shirley. It truly warms my heart to see such generosity and goodwill gathered in one magnificent room. The Cobb Charitable Trust, as many of you know, has always championed this event, believing deeply in its noble purpose and the wonderful spirit it fosters in our community. I let my gaze sweep slowly across the room, feeling the eyes of every single guest upon me. Then, very deliberately, I turned to Patricia Hollis, whose face still held that mask of bewildered shock. Her jaw remained slightly slack, her eyes glazed over with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. She had not moved an inch since Stanley Garner's pronouncement, as if glued to the polished marble floor. "Patricia, my dear," I began, my tone gentle, almost solicitous, yet firm enough that not a single word would be misunderstood. "I do want to express my gratitude for your efforts over the years in helping to organize such a significant event. Your dedication to high society and indeed to maintaining certain standards has always been clear. However, as Stanley and I were just discussing, with the expanded reach of the Cobb Charitable Trust, and particularly with the Q-Tech Group now managing the operations of this very venue, we feel it's time for a more unified approach to our philanthropic endeavors, a more direct vision, if you will." A subtle shiver ran through the assembled guests. No one dared to speak. They simply watched, their expressions a mix of fascinated horror and uncomfortable understanding. Stanley Garner stood beside me, a silent, unmoving pillar of support, his presence amplifying every quiet word I uttered. "Therefore," I continued, my smile not wavering, "after careful consideration, and in light of our new, comprehensive plans for growth and efficiency, the Cobb Charitable Trust will be taking full responsibility for the planning, execution, and all logistical aspects of future Silver Lining Balls. This means that, regrettably, we won't be extending the invitation for you to co-chair the event next year, Patricia, nor will the usual partnership agreements for your various associates be renewed. We need a team that is entirely aligned with our fresh strategic direction." The words, though delivered without a raised voice or a hint of malice, landed with the force of a physical blow. Patricia Hollis gasped, a sharp, choked sound that echoed in the profound silence. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair seemed to droop slightly, her shoulders slumping. All the color that had finally begun to return to her face now drained away completely, leaving her ashen. The power she had wielded for so long, the social currency she had leveraged to control and dismiss others, was being systematically dismantled, not with a shout, but with a quiet, polite, yet utterly absolute declaration. She finally found her voice, a strained whisper. But Barbara, that's impossible. I have always—" I offered a small, sympathetic shake of my head. "Times change, Patricia, and so do expectations. Our vision for the future of the Silver Lining Ball, and indeed for our associated charitable initiatives, requires a refreshed perspective. I trust you understand that these decisions are purely administrative, made with the best interests of the Trust and its beneficiaries at heart." My eyes held hers, a gentle but unyielding gaze. "Of course, we would still be delighted to welcome you as a guest to future events, should you choose to attend." The final sentence, offered with a saccharine sweetness, was the sharpest cut of all. It stripped her of her role, her power, and relegated her to the very status she had just tried to impose on me, a mere attendee, stripped of influence. Patricia Hollis's face contorted, a fleeting mask of raw fury and profound shame. She looked around the room, her eyes, desperately seeking an ally, a supportive glance, but found only averted gazes and uncomfortable silences. Her empire of judgment had crumbled around her. Without another word, her head held stiffly, her posture rigid, with a desperate attempt at dignity, she turned and walked away. Not through the staff entrance she had condemned me to, but directly towards the main doors, her retreating figure a diminishing silhouette against the grandeur of the hall. The room watched her go, a collective breath exhaled as the weight of her presence finally lifted. The grand ballroom, which had felt so stifling and judgmental just moments ago, now seemed to breathe a little easier, the air lighter with Patricia's departure. The collective gaze of the guests, no longer fixed on the retreating matriarch, began to slowly shift, many of them landing on me with newfound curiosity, a sprinkle of awe, and not a small amount of nervous calculation. Stanley Garner offered me a subtle, reassuring nod, then excused himself to attend to another pressing business matter, his quiet departure leaving me free to navigate the room on my own terms. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the moment settle around me. The sting of Patricia's initial snobbery was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. It was not a triumphant roar, but a calm, steady hum of justice served. My volunteer sash, still tied around my waist, suddenly felt like an antique, an echo of a role that no longer existed. My eyes scanned the elegant crowd, past the shifting alliances and hushed recalculations, until they found Shirley Tanner. She stood near a display of antique maps, her silver hair catching the soft light from a nearby chandelier. Her expression was thoughtful, a gentle smile gracing her lips, as if she was absorbing the unexpected drama with a quiet appreciation for its poetic justice. When our eyes met, her smile widened, genuine and unburdened by artifice. I made my way across the polished floor, weaving through knots of now awkward conversations. People parted for me with a deference that hadn't been there an hour ago, their eyes darting away quickly when I met their gaze. It was a stark reminder of how quickly perception could change when hidden power was revealed. "Shirley," I said softly, reaching her side. "Thank you for your kind words earlier tonight. They meant a great deal." Shirley's blue eyes sparkled. "Barbara, my dear, it was simply the truth. You possess a lovely spirit, and no one should ever tell you otherwise. And I must say," she added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that was quite the spectacle. Absolutely brilliant." "That woman," she waved a dismissive hand in the general direction Patricia had exited. "She's always been rather a bully, hasn't she? A high time someone put her in her place." I chuckled softly. "Indeed, though I prefer to think of it as simply adjusting the seating arrangements. Speaking of which, I couldn't help but notice your deep appreciation for those antique maps earlier. You seem to have a real eye for history and for the stories they tell." Shirley's face lit up. "Oh, I do. My late husband, God rest his soul, was an amateur cartographer. He taught me to see the world through the lines and colours of a map, not just as geography, but as a journey of human endeavour. Since he passed, I've been trying to honour his memory by curating a small exhibit in the local library, showcasing maps that tell stories of forgotten journeys. But resources are tight, and finding authentic pieces, let alone funding the display, has been a challenge." She sighed, a wistful look in her eyes. "It's a passion project, truly." "A passion project," I repeated, a warm smile spreading across my face. "Shirley, the Cobb Charitable Trust, as you now know, is looking to expand its reach, not just in grand events, but in supporting genuine community initiatives that foster knowledge and connection. Your husband's legacy and your dedication to it sounds like exactly the kind of venture we'd be honored to support. I'd love to connect you with our Director of Philanthropic Grants. I believe a project like yours, preserving history and making it accessible to the community deserves more than just a place on a wish list. Shirley's eyes widened, a look of stunned disbelief giving way to profound, shining gratitude. Her hand went to her chest, a soft gasp escaping her lips.
Barbara, are you serious? That would be a dream come true for Harold, for me, for the children who would get to see those stories. Completely serious, I affirmed, a quiet joy bubbling within me. Consider it done. I'll have my office contact you tomorrow. No strings attached, just a genuine desire to see worthy stories and worthy people receive the support they deserve. Shirley simply stared at me for a long moment, her eyes welling up with unshed tears.
"You truly are a blessing, Barbara Cobb," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Her face, etched with a lifetime of quiet resilience, softened into an expression of unadulterated hope. Her world, just quietly but profoundly changed in an instant. Shirley's gratitude, raw and heartfelt, was a profound gift. It washed over me, a balm after the calculated coldness I had endured. I pressed her hand gently, a silent promise in my touch, then turned to survey the room one last time. The air hummed with a different energy now, a mix of curiosity, discomfort, and perhaps a flicker of respect. Faces that had once held thinly veiled pity now watched me with an almost deferential gaze. The power dynamics had irrevocably shifted, and the truth, once hidden, now permeated every corner of the grand ballroom. I saw Janet Weston approach me, her kind eyes full of warmth. "Barbara," she murmured, giving my arm a squeeze, "you were truly magnificent tonight. I always knew you had this strength within you." "Thank you, Janet," I replied, my voice soft. "Your support, as always, means the world to me. It makes all the difference." I offered her a knowing smile, then began my slow, deliberate walk towards the main entrance. I didn't need to be escorted. I didn't need to seek permission. My steps were measured, unhurried, reflecting a quiet authority that required no fanfare. As I moved, conversations paused, heads turned, and a path seemed to open before me. No one dared to look away, but no one dared to approach either, not anymore. The volunteer sash, still tied around my waist, suddenly felt like an antique, a relic of a past humiliation that no longer held any power over me. It was a tangible reminder of the journey I had just traversed, from dismissed charity worker to the quiet force behind the entire event. I remembered being directed to the staff entrance, subtly guided away from the main thoroughfares, expected to disappear into the service corridors. Now, as I approached the ornate main doors, the uniformed doormen, who usually reserved their most elaborate bows for the likes of Patricia Hollis, straightened their backs and held the heavy oak doors wide, their expressions reflecting a newly discovered reverence. Stepping out into the cool night air, the soft glow of the gas lamps illuminating the cobblestone drive, I took a deep, liberating breath. The silence of the night was a welcome contrast to the cacophony of the ballroom, a quiet counterpoint to the dramatic symphony that had just unfolded. I walked down the stone steps to where my simple carriage awaited, the same one that had brought me, not a grand, ostentatious vehicle, but a modest, understated conveyance. Harold, no longer in a security uniform but dressed in his simple blacksmith's attire, stood by the door, a faint smile playing on his lips. His eyes, though, held a sparkle of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgment of the quiet storm I had just weathered. The cost of staying quiet had been years of biting my tongue, enduring the slights, and living beneath a cloak of perceived insignificance. It had been the pain of watching my family's name be dragged through the mud, of being married off as a debt settlement. But it had also been the silent cultivation of power, the strategic gathering of resources, and the meticulous planning of this very moment. Tonight, it had all been proven proven that true power wasn't about loud pronouncements or inherited titles, but about quiet competence, unwavering integrity, and the strategic deployment of truth. It was about knowing who you were, regardless of the role society tried to force upon you. As the carriage rolled away, leaving the glittering lights of the Silver Lining Ball behind, I knew this was just the beginning. The world would learn, one quiet, deliberate step at a time, that the lame blacksmith's wife was far more than they could ever imagine. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.